Hello everybody, this is Randy, Kilo November 4 Yankee Bravo Alpha, and today's video will be the complete setup of an FT-991A with the RigPi operating system loaded on a Raspberry 4 as a server. What this will do is essentially give you the capabilities to remotely operate. My current configuration, my ham shack, I have a flex radio that's all more or less remote, even at my desktop. And the FT-991A with this RigPi operating system will allow me to operate my FT-991A, and I use it solely for local FM repeaters. I don't use it for HF. And it allowed me to do the same with my FT-991A. I can remotely operate it. Essentially, there's a few things you need to have. You need to have a radio. You got to have a radio that has an internal USB card, such as the FT-991 or 991A. You have to have a good USB cable. I use a solid state drive, or you can use a SD card. Now, the solid state drive is much more secure, it's faster, and if you advertently power down your system, it's less likely to be corrupted. I've had a lot of issues with Raspberry Pi and SD cards. If power shut down, it crashes on the next startup. And of course you got to have a computer. Couple sources here for download: WinDisk Imager and the free VNC free viewer. You need that to set it up. Moving on. So going back a little bit now, if you don't have a radio with a internal card, MFJ can hook you up. They got a great system. It's called the I think it's the 1234. I think the B RigPi. It comes with the Raspberry Pi 4. It comes with 2 gig of RAM and a 32 gigabyte micro SD card, which should work fine. But if your radio has a internal sound card, this is the route I went. This is an example of a Raspberry Pi. I think that's at that time was $109. I don't remember what I paid for mine, but it's essentially a kit that has everything you need, and I think it even includes a SD card if you want to use it. First thing you need to do is go out to MFJ and download the image. Like I said, this is version 2. There will be a version 3 coming up. For me, the upgrades cost will be $5, 5 something. So no big deal. Be excited to see it. But you need to download and save this image. Save the image and back up the image in an archive folder so you don't ever corrupt it, and then make a second copy of it for your working file. So essentially, with all this hardware, the radio, the USB cable, a solid state or SD card, and the computer, you will be able to remotely operate your radio. My FT-991 works similar to my Flex. I can get on it, and what's really cool about it, I can get to my server and my radio on my Samsung phone, and I've tried it out and it works great. So couple things here. Before you do anything, download the free viewer. You need to know what your IP address is for that Raspberry Pi. So get the Raspberry Pi on the server, let it find the IP address, and you can use, I use advanced IP scanner. It looks at my network. Here's an example, and I can find the Raspberry Pi. Mine's at 192.168.1-95. You need to know that. You need to also download Mumble. It's your video, your voice over IP application, and of course WinDisk Imager, I think we already talked about. Just something you need to know: the default passwords with the MFJ operating system. Your login is admin when you bring up the application in a web browser. There's no password. You will change that later. Of course, VNC and here's your ports you'll use. Raspberry Pi login ports to your root. The password's the same, and then the Mumble server, use your own username, but you always got to remember the password is 7388 when you first log in, and remember this port number. This is important when you set it up, and you make sure you've got it set up in your router for port forwarding. One thing you also need to do before you get started, I'm going to assume you know how to do this. This is specific to FT-991A. Go in your menu and you set up these different positions. Your baud rate, 38400. And then you need to set up the rear, I should have had this number, but selection 45 need to set it to rear. If you're going to go back to normal usage, you need to set it back to forward or to mic. Number 48 is USB. 74 needs to be switched to back or rear, excuse me. 77 should be set to USB. 108 should be set to rear, and 111 should be set to USB. Once you have this set up, it's ready to communicate to the radio. So this is the initial start of it, and I will follow up to the actual setting it up. Okay, so I'm going to assume you know how to format your SD card or your solid state drive, and you've got it formatted and ready to go. Next thing you do is go up and open this Win32 disk imager. Wherever you save the file, the image you purchased from MFJ, you want to go here and find it and then load it into there. And essentially all you're going to do is write it to your drive. Now I'm going to write it to a solid state drive. It's actually pretty quick. So go ahead and hit write. It's going to say blah blah blah. Yeah, you want to go ahead and do it. So it's going to write it. And on the solid state drive it's pretty quick. We'll just go ahead and let it go through the process. Background for my antennas in the attic. Isn't that pretty cool? I'm gonna roll my HF. This is actually a TV antenna here, but here's all my HF antennas. You can see this right here. It's actually a 6 meter antenna that I built. It's also in the attic. Okay, so we're getting there. It's almost written, but it's important I show you what to do after this is finished up. And it's loading. It's almost there. Okay, we're at 88%, 90, 92. Okay, about there. Okay, hit OK. And the next trick is go down below, open up your USB. You want to safely remove this, so just eject the drive. Mine's on drive O. And that kind of covers you got the image loaded onto your drive now. Okay, before we get started, one thing I just want to identify. Now I know the Raspberry Pi 4 has a USB 3, but for safety reasons, I always use a adapter going to the Raspberry Pi that has a power input. That way I'm sure I got enough power on my solid state drive. It always boots up. I don't think you necessarily have to have it, but I do it just to be sure that I know that it's got plenty of power and it's not taking it away from the Raspberry Pi. So here's an example from Amazon. This one here is 18 bucks, almost 19 bucks. It's something you could use. Okay, so now we've got our drive plugged in, either the SD card or solid state drive, into the Raspberry. You powered up the Raspberry. It may take a few minutes. You've loaded the VNC viewer, used the username and the port and all that stuff that I identified earlier. So let's go ahead and open it up, and let's just see here. And it came up. Whoop, I think I might have closed it. Oh, here we go. So let's go ahead and open it up. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and set up the video side of this screen configuration. And we've got HDMI. You want to configure it. You're going to change the screen, change the resolution. I'll go to 1200, hit check mark, and bam. Okay, and you can go ahead and close that window. Now you're up. Now what do we see? We see mumble. We see it's up and running, and we're good to go. So next step, we're going to configure the Raspberry Pi. We're going to maximize the disk space on it. And then because you have a radio with a sound card, we're going to go and edit the setup because it defaults to radios that don't have sound cards. So we're going to do a little editing, and then we'll be getting close ready. So next step will be to go ahead and set up the drive. Okay, so we're back, and what we're going to do now is just make sure we can take up all the space in your hard drive. So we're going to go to a terminal window. Just click on that box. Go ahead and expand it up a little bit. I'm going to run a sudo command here. I'm going to copy it. You can see on the right. Come up here, click, and then paste, hit enter. And what we're going to do is go down to number 7, which is advanced options, hit enter. And we're going to stay at A1, which is band file system. So we'll go ahead and click enter again. Comes up, okay, resize, hit okay. And you're done. So now you're just down arrow, down arrow, down arrow to the last one, right arrow, finish. And would you like to reboot? Yep, I want to reboot. So I reboot. Okay, so we rebooted it. We're back to the Raspberry desktop. There's a couple things you got to do with audio. The Raspberry, the RigPi is defaulting to a no sound card in your radio. Of course, my FT-991 does, so I got to change something there. But before that, I do that, I'm going to come up here and configure mumble. I'll hit settings. And before I do that, I'm going to come up here to the right to the little speaker that's going to exit it. I'll right click on it, and I see USB code. I'll click on it, and it's there. Now, anyways, I'm back to audio input. It says default. I want to select the USB audio codec, USB audio default audio device. I'll hit apply. Then I come to audio output, and for some reason, I'm not sure, but they say to set this to 50. And do the same up here. Go look at, it's usually on the bottom, the USB codec, USB audio default audio device. Hit apply. Hit OK. Now, one thing you need to do after that is go hit server, quit mumble. And now we're going to edit the file to ensure so it'll know when it boots up it's got a radio with a sound card in it. So here's a sudo command. If I can get it, I'm going to run it. I'm going to copy, right click, paste, hit enter. So I'm looking for the defaults.ctl.card. And it's happened on my screen. It's on the very bottom. So I come down, arrow down to that line, right arrow, right over the 0, just hit a 1 and hit a delete to delete the 0. Arrow down, 1, delete the 0. Now the next trick is just hit Control and X. It says save modified buffer. Answering no would discard change. I just put a Y in there, and then it said file name to rewrite, and I just hit enter, and that's done. I'll go ahead and close the terminal window. Now back to the desktop. Now what you want to do is go ahead and hit the Raspberry symbol up here, go to log out, and hit reboot. Let it reboot again. Okay, so you rebooted your Raspberry Pi. Just one note, this Mumble server sometimes takes, a minute or so to connect. You'll say, can't connect. Just be patient, it eventually will. And now I'm going to go ahead and go to a browser. And I'm going to log in to the Raspberry Pi. It's a local, so whatever your IP address is, put that in there. The default username is admin, and just hit sign. Bam, there you are. This is your startup. So what you're going to do is set your call sign in there. Leave it for now while you're testing. Leave it at admin, or you can change and put some password in there. Use a different username and password, and then you can just hit fill below from call book, and it just fills that information for you. So what you're going to do now is hit next. Now you got to hook up your radio. So you take this drop down here. I'm going to look for the YAESU, which is the bottom one. And I go for model. So I come up here and look for the model. I saw it there a second. There it is, 991. Big thing is your R port. Look for that. You can see it. Yep, there's a driver there. I usually grab the first one. Your power settings. And then you can go connect the radio. And just wait and see if it hooks up. And congratulations, I'm hooked up. I'll go to next. And there it is. It's hooked up to my radio. Okay, now I'm hooked up to the radio. We'll just do a real connect real quick. I know it's already hooked up, but I like to validate it and verify it. Okay, yep, it's hooked up. So I'll minimize this. Now you want to hook your audio up too. So you go down here and you've loaded the program Mumble. You got it set up there. You got to set up your website. So for example, you're going to set up whatever name you want to call it. Example, whatever your IP address is on your local network. Remember the port. You got to have that port. You can put whatever the username is and whatever the label you want. Now, when you first do this, it's going to come up, say, wrong password. Use a default password, 8377, when it asks that. Then it'll connect. So let's go ahead and hit connect. Oh, look at that. I got audio. So I just went ahead and turned Mumble off. I'm going to go ahead and set up now. My key here is my macros. Keep in mind, I use this radio solely for local repeaters. I use my Flex for all my HF communications, but I love this radio. So what I've done, I set up the macros to what I want. So basically, to do that, I'm just going to pull in my macro that I've set up, and I'm going to restore this bank, and I'm going to browse, and it's this macro right here. That's what I set up, and I'll go through that here in a second. And let's go to the tuner. I'm going to turn the audio back on now. Reconnect to the server. Okay. And so what I've done, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go to this. These are test frequencies. So I've set up the frequency for all my local repeaters. And I got a couple test frequencies. And then I got all the repeaters in a local area loaded here. One thing I've done is I've added a macro to the squelch to 0. And I adjust it back to 30. And a lot of times you just want to test it, see if it's working. I added a scan button to scan up and down to the frequencies, or scan up. And to stop scan, just hit this button here and it stops it. But I can check it, for example, if I want to go right to a tower, to a repeater, I just click on the button. You notice it changed here. It's the same thing happened on the radio. It changes. So let me go. I think Mumble, yeah, it's connected. Okay, so for example, let's just go scan. Let's go start scanning here and just watch it. And if somebody keys up on a repeater, it'll come up and you'll hear it. And probably nobody's going to key up now. So let me go ahead and stop. I'm gonna just let me just hit one of the Huntsville repeaters here. See if it comes up. Okay, I'm on 145.330. You got the kit. You just take your mouse to PTT, click it, and let go. And it hit the repeater. So I'm not a pro at these macros. I kind of learned how to look at something and I copy it. Matter of fact, let me go back and take it back to my test frequency so it won't be interrupted. Here's the macros. So here's the macro for my test going to 144.080. That is the macro for that. If I go to 44.6.080, here's a macro for that. Now, what I've also done, I've set up all my local repeaters on my memory channels from 1 all the way up to 23. So I got a macro for each one of these. So for example, if I hit this one here, it's going to 145, 150. Well, here's the macro that takes you there. And here's a one that goes to the next one. So let's look at and see what's different about these. These are the memory locations in my radio. So number one in my memory locations, 144.080. It's a simplex, and here's how you set it up. Now I'm going to go to my number 2 memory location, which is my test frequency. What you notice from this one to this one, the only thing different is it went from 31 in this line to 32. And that's so on, so forth, all the way up to number 9. And once you get to the 9th memory location, you're going to go to the 10th. What changes there is 2 things. So you'll notice this line was 30. I take that to 31. And I start back to 0. And that's kind of how it goes all the way up. You go to 19, then you go to 20. That'll go to 2. Let's see if I got it here. Yeah, 2. And you start back to 0. And that's how you set up the macros. I set a squelch macro, the 30. That's how you set that. And the key is right here. 33 is 30. If I want to set it, and I got a macro set up for 0, and instead of 33, I got it set to 0. Scan up button. Here's a macro for that. Here's a stop scan stop. That's a macro for that. Of course, I got power on, power off, and then here default macros that I don't currently use. One thing I suggest, once you get your macro set up, I'm in the wrong place. Let's go up here, this little box, go back and say save this bank, download the macros, and just tell them where you want to put it. Set it on your hard drive, and that way you can always, if something happens to your macros, you had a good macro, you can go in there and reload the macro. So I hope this was informational for you. I love it. It works great on my cell phone, my Samsung phone. I use it on a desktop. I don't go through my radio mic input or the sound. It's all going through my computer, through my boom mine. Excuse me. Let's change frequency. Boom mic. This is the same mic I use for my Flex radio. So the only difference is for this RigPi server, to key it, you just hit the PTT button to key it. Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. Hope it's informational. If you have any questions whatsoever, send me an email at admin@KN4YBA.com. 73s.